There is a category of German surname that should not have survived. Not because it was rare, exactly, but because of what it originally meant. These were names born out of service, names given to men who worked, fought, administered, or knelt before power that no longer exists. The empire they served dissolved more than 2 centuries ago. Its courts are gone. Its titles mean nothing on paper anymore. And yet the names remain, carried across oceans, printed on passports, spoken at dinner tables that have no idea what they are still holding on to. For years, genealogists treated these surnames as pleasant historical trivia. A name that once meant steward, or forester, or the emperor's man, filed away as an interesting fact about a distant relative. Nothing more. Then researchers working in genetic genealogy began asking a sharper question. If a surname was tied to a specific administrative function within the Holy Roman Empire, a function passed from father to son for generations, would that inheritance leave a trace not just in the archive, but in the DNA itself? The answer complicated almost everything these families believed about where they came from. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what the Holy Roman Empire actually was, because it was not really an empire in the way the word suggests today. For roughly 800 years, it existed as a sprawling, fractured patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, and free cities, loosely bound under an elected emperor whose real power varied wildly by century and by region. It stretched, at different points, across much of what is now Germany, Austria, parts of Italy, and the Low Countries. It was less a single nation than a system, a web of loyalties, offices, and inherited obligations that shaped how ordinary families identified themselves for centuries. Within that system, surnames often began not as family names in the modern sense, but as functional labels. A man might be known by the trade he practiced, the estate he administered, the forest he guarded, or the office he held under a local lord or bishop. Over generations, as these labels calcified into hereditary surnames, they carried forward something more specific than a typical occupational name. They carried a record of position within the empire's administrative machinery. Historians have long read these surnames as reliable clues. A name tied to a ministerial office, a court function, or a guild role connected to imperial service suggested a family line with a documented, traceable relationship to that structure. It was, on the surface, one of the more solid threads connecting a modern family to a specific historical role. That confidence did not last. The first cracks showed up in the same place they usually do, in the gaps between the paper and the people. Genealogists working with parish and court records noticed something uncomfortable. Families carrying the same rare, function-based surname, both claiming descent from the same documented office holder, frequently could not be connected through any surviving record. Registers were incomplete. Entire generations sometimes existed only as a name on a tax roll, with no baptismal or marriage record to confirm the biological link between one bearer of the name and the next. That gap, on its own, might mean nothing. Records from this period are famously incomplete, but it raised an old and stubborn question in genealogical circles. Did every person carrying one of these names actually descend, in blood, from the man who first earned it? Or had the name, at some point, detached from the family that originally carried it, inherited by someone else through means the records never captured? This is where genetics entered the investigation, and where the story stopped being a matter of archives and started being a matter of biology. The tool best suited to this question is the Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed from father to son with very little change across generations, accumulating small mutations slowly over centuries. Because German surnames, like most in the region, traditionally followed the paternal line, the Y chromosome offered something the archive alone could never provide: a way to test whether men sharing a rare, function-based surname today are actually descended from a shared paternal ancestor, or whether the name survived while the underlying bloodline quietly changed. Researchers in genetic genealogy began comparing Y chromosome markers across men carrying these historically loaded surnames, names tied to specific documented offices, estates, or guild positions within the old imperial structure. The goal was straightforward: Does the biology agree with the paperwork? If you're drawn to this kind of investigation, where DNA is used less to invent a story and more to quietly test one, this is a good moment to subscribe, because there is far more of this hidden in ordinary family names than most people realize. The results did not resolve neatly in either direction. They split. In a number of surname lines, the Y chromosome data lined up convincingly. Men living an ocean apart, carrying the same rare functional name, showed a genetic signature consistent with true shared paternal descent stretching back centuries. The record and the biology told the same story. But in other lines, and this is where the investigation widened rather than closed, the picture broke apart. Men carrying an identical surname, both with documented ties to the same historical office or estate, showed Y chromosome signatures with no meaningful genetic relationship at all. On paper, they were kin. In the genome, they were strangers. That was not a flaw in the research. That was a signal. It meant that somewhere across the centuries, the name had separated from the bloodline that first carried it. And once researchers accepted that possibility seriously, the explanations multiplied. Three frameworks tend to dominate discussion of what could produce this kind of split, and in most surname lines, more than one has likely played a role. The first is what genealogists call a non-paternity event, a clinical term for a very human occurrence, where a child was raised under a father's name without being that father's biological son. Across 20 or more generations, even a low rate of this compounds. A single break early in a lineage means every descendant afterward carries the name while carrying none of the original bloodline. The second is inherited office rather than inherited blood. Within the empire's administrative system, certain functional names were tied less to a family than to a role, an estate, a forestry post, a stewardship, that could pass to a successor who was not a biological relation at all, particularly when a lord or bishop appointed a new office holder and the position's name simply carried forward with the job. In these cases, the surname was never meant to track bloodline in the first place. It tracked function. The third is convergent origin, the possibility that a functional surname arose independently in more than one region, from the same occupational word or the same type of role, without any single shared founder. Two unrelated families in two different territories under the empire's broad umbrella could end up carrying what looks, on paper, like the identical name. None of these explanations is dishonest, and none diminishes the families carrying these names today. But together, they mean that a shared surname is a claim about inherited memory and social continuity, not automatically a claim about shared blood. The turning point in this research came as testing expanded beyond small, isolated samples into larger comparison panels, drawing on broader Y chromosome marker sets and bigger pools of tested men across multiple countries where descendants of Empire-era families had settled. This mattered enormously because earlier surname studies, working with only a handful of participants per name, could not reliably distinguish a genuinely coherent paternal lineage from a coincidental cluster of unrelated men sharing a common word. With deeper data, researchers found something in several of the oldest, most function-specific surnames that they had not fully expected. Not every surviving branch carried the regional signature the paperwork implied. In a number of documented cases, family lines with surnames tied to specific German or Austrian territories carried Y chromosome signals more consistent with populations further east or south than the recorded office ever suggested, patterns hinting at older movement across the empire's shifting, porous borders, or contact with populations the surviving records never mention at all. Not the region the documents predicted. Not even the story the family had repeated for generations. The surprise was not that some lines had unexplained gaps. The surprise was what the gaps, once tested, actually contained. Researchers remain cautious here, and rightly so. This evidence does not prove a single hidden migration story for every rare imperial surname. What it does suggest, carefully, is that the empire itself was never the closed, orderly system its administrative records make it look like. Estates changed hands. Borders shifted by treaty and by war. Soldiers, clergy, and officials moved constantly across territories that no modern map preserves in the same shape. A name fixed to one office in one region could, across centuries, end up carried by descendants, or successors, whose deeper ancestry reached into parts of Europe the original documents never recorded. The genome was not overturning these family stories. It was revealing an older, wider one sitting quietly underneath them. This matters beyond any single name, because it forces a more honest picture of what an empire like this actually was. We tend to imagine historical institutions as clean and hierarchical, an office, a family, a bloodline, passed cleanly downward through time. But the Holy Roman Empire, for all 8 centuries of its existence, was closer to a living organism than a filing system. People moved through it. Offices outlived the families that first held them. Names persisted while the human beings carrying them changed, merged, and occasionally reset entirely. Picture, for a moment, one of the old forested border territories where many of these functional names first took root, dense stands of spruce climbing toward low ridgelines, a stone way station half collapsed at a crossroads, the kind of place where a forester or a tollkeeper would have lived his entire life without ever traveling more than a day's walk from his post. Somewhere nearby, a church register sits in a diocesan archive, ink browned with age, recording a birth here, a death there, entire decades reduced to a handful of surviving lines. Stand in that landscape long enough, and it becomes easy to imagine how quietly a name could survive while everything beneath it changed. A foundling absorbed into a forester's household during a hard winter, a widow's second husband taking on his predecessor's post and, with it, his predecessor's name. None of it deceptive. All of it profoundly human. And centuries later, still legible, faintly, in a laboratory reading a chromosome that has no memory of borders, only of fathers and sons. That is the real finding underneath 15 rare German surnames tied to imperial service. Not a simple confirmation that every bearer today is the direct blood descendant of a documented medieval officeholder. Not a debunking either. Something more interesting than both. A picture of names as vessels of memory and belonging, sometimes matching the bloodline beneath them exactly, sometimes carrying forward a very different, and often older, ancestral story than the paperwork ever recorded. If you carry one of these names, the honest answer to whether your bloodline truly served the empire is rarely a clean yes or no. Your name may have. Your biology may agree completely, or it may point toward a deeper, more layered history the records never had the means to capture. Either answer is remarkable. Both are part of what it actually means to descend from people who lived, served, adapted, and endured within a system that lasted 800 years and left its names scattered across a continent it no longer governs. The empire is gone. Its offices are empty. Its borders exist now only in old maps folded into archive boxes. But the names went on speaking, quietly, long after the system that made them fell silent. And in more families than anyone expected, the genome is still listening. If stories like this interest you, the quiet places where a name and a bloodline either confirm each other or reveal something else entirely, subscribe, because history rarely stays as simple as the record makes it look.